It's lovely to see you all. Welcome to one of Brookline Booksmith's first in-person events of 2022. We're so excited to have you all here. This is part of our author event series. Tonight we are celebrating Kit Mayquist for his book Tripping Arcadia in conversation with S.T. Gibson. My name is Bonnie. I'm the assistant events director and the bookseller here at Brookline Booksmith. It's so lovely to have you all here. Thank you for coming. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. Please keep your masks on and your phones off for the duration of the event. They don't have to be fully off. Silent is fine. It's just a nice mnemonic. And thank you for keeping the event safe and enjoyable for everyone. If you haven't yet pre-ordered a book, or if you've pre-ordered your book but you haven't yet picked it up, I'll be in the back by the register there with copies, and at the end we'll have a signing line so you can purchase a copy or pick up your copy, and Kit will sign them at the end of the event. And finally, we will have a Q&A for the last 10-15 minutes of the event, so hold your questions till the end, but make sure you have them ready. And now for the fun part. It is my pleasure to introduce our authors and tell you all a bit about the wonderful book we are here to celebrate. Our conversation partner tonight, S.T. Gibson, is an author, literary agent, and village wise woman in training. She holds a bachelor's degree in creative writing from UNC Asheville and a master's degree in theological studies from Princeton Theological Seminary. She is the author of the books Dowry of Blood, Odd Spirits, and Robber Girl. Her essays in short fiction have appeared in Mithridate magazine and elsewhere. I'm not sure if I said that right, but was that? Okay. Thank you. She currently lives in Boston with her fiance, spoiled Persian cat, and vintage blazer collection. And a fan of everything spooky and indulgent, Kit Mayquist is a bisexual transmasc writer who can be found in the historic shadows of Boston, Mass. Hunched over his desk with a sullen Persian cat.
It's the same Persian.
Same Persian cat. With the very same Persian cat in his lap and surrounded by antiques. He has a master's degree in medieval history from the University of Iceland and a bachelor's from Portland State University. And yes, if you ask him, Stumptown will always have the best coffee. He is the author of Tripping Arcadia, which of course we are all here to celebrate. So a bit about the book. It's like a cross between The Great Gatsby and Mexican Gothic, all set in Boston. So what more could you ask for, honestly? We've been excited about this book since we heard about it coming out, especially because of the local connection both in the book and with the author. So it is so lovely to have you both here tonight. The protagonist, med school dropout Lena in Tripping Arcadia, is desperate for a job, any job, to help her parents who are approaching bankruptcy after her father was injured and laid off nearly simultaneously. So when she is offered a position, against all odds, working for one of Boston's most elite families, the illustrious and secretive Verdeaux, she knows she must accept it, no matter how bizarre the interview or how vague the job description. Publishers Weekly called Tripping Arcadia a seductive fever dream with ingenious plot twists and a louche flair. Tripping Arcadia is an absolute page-turner. It explores family legacy, sacrifice, and the intoxicating and dangerous power of wealth. Not to mention, it's got all you want, sapphic lust, botanical potions, Byronic heroes, and the deadly secrets of a contemporary Boston Brahmin class. We are so excited to hear Kit talk about it. Everyone, please welcome Kit Mayquist and S.T. Gibson.
Wow, thank you for that fantastic introduction.
That was lovely. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for being here. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you and talk a little bit about
Can I get backup bridge 2, please? Helen, backup bridge 2.
Someone needs a backup. Yeah, no, I can't believe the day is finally here. It feels like it's come a long way from kind of first conceiving of this novel.
Absolutely.
Laying, on a friend's couch, ill, just daydreaming.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a long road here, and I'm just thrilled to finally be able to share it with everyone. So.
That's awesome. Well, I have some questions for you that I would love to be able to kind of meander through, and we can kind of see where the conversation takes us.
Sure.
But I always like to open with a question like this. So if you would, describe Tripping Arcadia in 5 words.
Okay. The easiest summary that I have is actually the one that got me my agent, because it was like a very late night and I was desperate, and I just tweeted into the darkness, please tell me if there's anyone out there who wants sad boys crying in greenhouses. And my agent happened for some reason to see this and was like, yes, please send this to me. So that's how that happened. So that's always going to be like my favorite 5-word summary of this book, even though it's really, there's so much more to it. At its core, it started as a book that's just a sad boy crying in a greenhouse. There is a lot of greenhouse content though, so if that's what you like, then hopefully you like this. But I don't know. I'm gonna just stick with that one for now.
I think that's a good one. I love that. It's a little bit of a teaser.
Yeah.
Get the people enticed.
Yeah. I could say something about poisons, but really it's the greenhouse.
It's the boys crying in greenhouse.
Yeah.
Tripping Arcadia is a contemporary Gothic.
Yes.
Could you tell the people a little bit about what a contemporary Gothic is, in your opinion? Because I know that not everyone totally has a frame of reference for what that subgenre entails.
Yeah, so I think Gothic as a genre tends to exist in a very historical context, right? You think of Gothic as this older genre, and books that tend to be written in the Gothic genre take place like 100 or more years ago as a general rule, or at least or at the very least like not our current time. So a contemporary Gothic, at least in my opinion, is writing a contemporary mystery or a story, but through a Gothic lens. It's going to be a contemporary mystery that deals with a lot of Gothic themes, but reapplied and placed into a modern context. So that means that, when you think of the cornerstones of the Gothic genre, there's always going to be this tension between like class and wealth and the decaying factor of wealth. And I think we very much have that now. And so themes like that kind of being rewritten and reapplied.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've given us a little bit about what a contemporary Gothic is, and I do think that Gothic literature in general is kind of experiencing a revival, which is not to say that it hasn't always been there, but we've seen the total off to the races success of books like Mexican Gothic, books like Plain Bad Heroines. Oh God, did I get that right? I think so. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And Dark Academia as a subgenre of the Gothic, and people are just really hungry for it right now. So, why do you think that we're having this little mini revival like right now? What makes this current moment different from, let's say, 1995 or something like that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, the simple answer is we live in depressing times.
I mean, you're not wrong.
But I think more than that, I have 2 answers. One is I think we owe a lot to like books like Mexican Gothic, because they really captured audiences in a way that's really revitalized a genre that a lot of people thought was kind of dead. But I think for a kind of deeper answer, it's because we are living in a time where the same issues that gave rise to the Gothic genre back in its origin are existing today. They're in the social mind today. So I mentioned before issues like class and wealth, and kind of this growing disdain and disgust at wealth and class divide, things like that. One of the cornerstones of the Gothic genre is the decaying familial home, but at the time, it was these ornate houses that hadn't, there wasn't the money anymore to really upkeep them, and we have that in the U.S. today. I mean, even there's this horror at homes that you could buy in the 90s, like no one can obtain anymore, and we kind of look at them with like, oh, why would you even do that? So I think just there's a lot that our current society echoes that is really lending itself to revitalization of the genre.
I think too we're seeing a kind of flowering of more eyes on Gothic stories that are from people writing from traditionally marginalized backgrounds, from non-Western perspectives, from queer perspectives. Tripping Arcadia has a queer love story in it. And I think that's really interesting, and I'm excited to see more of that. So that was very interesting. TA is a contemporary book, but it's written in a style that feels very classic and nostalgic, harkening back to these older Gothic stories, maybe I suppose would be like 19th century sort of writing. Like, when you decide to use that voice and that style for a whole book, there's going to be challenges. There's 350 pages of sustaining what I think was done masterfully and beautifully, really. But what were some challenges that you ran into when you were writing in this kind of antiquated, I mean that as a compliment, voice?
I mean, I wrote it in that voice because that's quite simply just what I wanted to do. It's a voice that I love, and that I think, I always call it a very nostalgic tone.
Absolutely.
It's this kind of dreamy, haunted tone that we see in a lot of literature. I mean, one of my favorite books is Brightside Revisited, and I think it's not a Gothic necessarily, but there's kind of something about it, but it's not a Gothic. But the tone that's in books like that, I think, is something that I really wanted to play around with, and that I was craving, but I wanted to write something that took place in the present day. And I think for a character like Lena, who has that same kind of yearning and nostalgia, it just fit very well with her character and everything that she was, and I ended up finding a perfect protagonist. So.
Yeah. Lena to me is this really memorable, like, resentful kind of protagonist.
Oh, she's angry.
She's so angry, and she's morally gray, and she's ambitious in her own way, which I don't think that I see that kind of main character very often in female characters and femme characters, which I thought was really, really interesting. And so I want to know what your experience was like coming up with a protagonist who was going to drive this novel, because she's got so much rage inside her.
I mean, don't we all?
Oh yeah, exactly. I think she expresses a rage that, like you said, a lot of us do feel it, like wealth and the class divide and
Student debt.
Student debt, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, really, I feel like in a lot of classic Gothic literature, we always have the story of the woman who gets somehow either hired or married into this creepy family, and so the story begins. And but typically, it's it's almost passive, I guess. There's a kind of quietness to the heroines typically, and it's not always, but as a general rule. And I was like, well, where's the anger? Like, I would be angry, and I think one of the cornerstones of writing Tripping Arcadia was I wanted to write a book that was as angry at the debt crisis, at the economy, at situations beyond your control, that I wanted to write a book that mirrored my experiences, the experiences of my friends, the world in which I grew up with and that I lived in. And I wanted to see that anger that was felt, in those conversations when you're at a diner with your friends and you're just ranting because, you wish your job paid you more and all this stuff. And I hadn't really found a book that captured that at the time I was writing Tripping Arcadia, and so it was an anger that I wanted to make very present on the page, and that I wanted to make it central motivating factor. Because I mean, really, do you need a more motivating factor than student debt?
Oh, I certainly don't. Lena is so interesting to me too, because like you're saying, she comes from this very working class background, and her family's very working class, and so are her friends. And she's experienced student debt, she's experienced her father's medical debt, and like all these kind of injustices that have happened to her family. And then she gets thrust into the Rideau's milieu, and all of a sudden she has not quite access, but a sort of proximity to wealth that she's never experienced before.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what was it like writing someone who suddenly is around such huge sums of money, and the person standing next to you's gown costs more than what you make in a year. Like, was it more of just channeling that rage, and is there an enticement to it as well?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the rage, but there's also, yeah, that temptation, that, you know, I always say that, as much as we may want to see like a millionaire on the, you know, in the middle of the street, stripped of all of their money, we want to be the person to take that money. And, you know, I think there's always going to be that kind of temptation, and I think that's something that I really wanted to have Lena wrestle with throughout the course of the book, is that feeling torn between the two worlds, no matter how horrific one world might be, or how much it should be wrong, but there's always going to be that temptation factor. So yeah, definitely that was something that I wanted to play around with, and you know, that is a tension that Lena has for herself throughout the book.
I found it very compelling as a reader. And, you know, Lena is out for vengeance in a way. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that.
Oh no.
Oh no, it's all about the vengeance. And her tool of revenge is poison.
Yes.
Which I haven't seen a lot of contemporary poisoning stories personally. I'm sure they're out there, but I haven't read many of them. So, you know, poison, and especially historical reconstructionist poison, are a really essential hinge of this novel. So do you have a background in that kind of research? Why poison?
Because it's fun. Who doesn't love poison? Honestly, it's because I have a slight background in it.
Okay.
When I was living in Iceland, I studied Layquist, which are Icelandic leech books.
Okay.
And a leech book, for those who might not know, is a medieval medicinal text. These are kind of like, I describe them as like hand copies of medieval WebMD, like when you just kind of like take notes when they're passed down.
Yeah.
And so I was studying Icelandic Layquist, and one of the things that I ended up studying was kind of tracing the herbs and the poisonous things that were used in a lot of remedies in the like 12th and 13th century, and tracing them back through the various editions, and just kind of reading the I'm always interested in that balance between like health and harm, and how like some things that we now view as poisonous, or you know, were viewed as something healing back then. It's always going to be like the dose that counts, right? And so I don't know, strange medieval poisons have always been fascinating to me, and especially at the time I was writing Tripping Arcadia. And it just seemed like a fun thing to play around with, especially in a modern context. And I think one of the biggest inspirations was actually seeing just all the different medieval monikers for the different poisons and things like that, and that's actually where Saint Spot comes from. Is a it's not exactly something I found in one of the manuscripts I was studying, but there are always these like poisonous things, and it always have like religious names, and then you would read stories about the monks tripping, and you know, like it's, you know, so but yeah, that's where a lot of the inspiration came from, and I think it was just a fun thing to combine those passions and have fun with.
That's awesome. Well, moving on from Lena, I would love to talk about the Verdot siblings, who I have a huge crush on both of them. So, you know, personal investment here. Jonathan and Audrey. And I pulled this quote that I think is just gorgeous and really speaks to kind of their juxtaposition. This is about the Verdot siblings. Apart, the siblings appeared to be entertaining, enigmatic creatures, but in photos together, they defied all rationale. As if a Baroque painting had somehow birthed two figures straight from myth and placed them among the brick and grit of Boston. So Audrey and Jonathan Verdot capture Lena's imagination, and they're sort of like complementary opposites to one another almost.
Yes.
So walk me through creating these memorable side characters that so enthrall the main character.
Every side characters.
Maybe not. They're actually quite central to the narrative.
Yeah, so I think I love a good Apollonian versus Dionysian dynamic, right? I'm always fascinated by characters who can summarize that, and that very mythological idea. And I think there's a story that's actually referenced in Tripping Arcadia, which is the lore that in the city of Delphi, you know, Apollo ruled for 3/4 of the year, but eventually Dionysus got his turn. And I don't know, I think I'm always fascinated by that tension and by that idea of a balance between needing that structure and that light and finding power within that versus finding power in the madness and in the chaos, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I found that in Audrey and Jonathan were just kind of playing off of each other and having two very different approaches to their own family, to the pressures their own family put upon them, and the expectations of the world that they found themselves in.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I just found them so compelling because they're complementary, but they're also kind of this light and dark, like you were saying, Apollinarian. How do you pronounce that word? Apollonian and Dionysian, and it kind of gets explosive sometimes when they're in the same room together, if they can stand to be around each other. But there's also a lot of love there that's expressed in a strange sibling sort of way. And of course, they share a father, Martin. And Martin is a larger than life villain. He is just kind of jumps off the page. So did you draw from any real life inspiration to create a bad guy like that?
I mean, I think there's no shortage of larger than life evil rich people to take inspiration from. I mean, I started writing this book in 2015, 2016, so if you imagine what was going on politically at that time, there's some inspiration there.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the inspiration for Martin actually came from reading about kind of old Gilded Age patriarchs, I guess. You know, there's just the immense wealth that existed at that time, and the decaying manor home in Tripping Arcadia, Arrow's Edge, is one of these Gilded Age manor homes. And so I started thinking about, like, well, what kind of person would feel comfortable calling a place like this home?
Yeah.
And my favorite thing about those Gilded Age manor homes is, if you've been to Newport, Rhode Island, and I think it's the Breakers, it might be the Elms actually. One of the mansions there, there's a literal red throne that was brought out for parties.
Oh my gosh.
And that I just always found so just egotistical and like hilarious. But at the same time, at that time, they were basically American royalty. But it's also just kind of grotesque that they viewed themselves that way as well.
For sure.
And Martin is someone who would get along in that environment. So there's a lot of inspiration from Martin. It's kind of taken from a lot of things, but at the same time, it's not that big of a stretch.
No, not at all. Not at all. You mentioned Arrow's Edge, which is sort of a character all of its own in this book. To me, it's one of those incredibly iconic locations, like Brideshead, or like, you know, the manor home, or the Haunting of Hill House, or the manor home in Mexican Gothic, that seems to have a life of its own. It breathes. High Place? Yes. And I wondered if there was was it inspired by those homes you mentioned in Newport? Was there any real life locations that you kind of cobbled together to create Arrow's Edge? Is it based on a manor home in real life?
It's not directly based on a manor home, but it is based on my weird fascination with the weird manor homes in the Berkshires.
The Berkshires, yes.
One of my favorites is Ventford Hall out there.
It's gorgeous.
And Arrow's Edge is not a Ventford Hall, it's a different architectural style. It is a closer kind of cousin to the architectural style found in Newport, like the Elms and the Breakers. But I was just fascinated with the idea that out in the middle of really nowhere, Massachusetts, was this little like haven for the wealthy in the Gilded Age, and all of their weird little houses that they built. A lot of them aren't around anymore, but I did a lot of deep dives into the kind of homes that were there, and so it's Error's Edge is its own thing, but
Okay.
it is pieced together from the lore of the houses that were around, both in the Berkshires and in Newport, Rhode Island.
So time for a field trip, obviously.
Yes.
Well, I think that's all the questions that I have for you this evening, but thank you so much for being in conversation with me and for sharing
Yeah,
more
thank
about
you.
your lovely book. I really hope that everyone here gets a chance to read it and enjoy it. But you have a bit of a treat for us, right? I believe that you were going to do a reading.
Yes, a little one.
A little one? Okay.
Tiny one.
All right. Small, a teaser, an aperitif.
Yeah. So yeah, I was thinking I would just read the opening to Tripping Arcadia, the first few pages.
I love that.
And yeah, we'll give you a feel for what's in store.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Well, the platform is yours.
Actually, take some water first.
Yeah, good idea.
Still getting used to masks after what, 3 years?
I know.
All right. Tripping Arcadia. The scent of death is sweet, a cologne of something chilling and saccharine, like spoiled figs and honey and mud. I know this because all of my memories of Error's Edge will be forever tainted with it. A miasma left adrift into the psyche late at night, when I'm driving or walking, or given more than a second alone. When the frost begins to gather on windows and the sign of the new year creeps in with all its flashing glory, that scent, with its unique and terrible power, consumes every part of me, until the very thought of each gilded room and once polished floor is stained with it, as much as the wallpaper still sits, forever stained with their blood. Months of my life can now be boiled down to these simple impressions: wine glasses in hands and heels on marble, herbs and the rise of steam from beakers, perfume and burning lips, a clink, a cut, a whisper. Each of them accurate, but each of them simple, dreamlike things, far prettier and far more poetic than the full reality. But that's not what the mind is good for, to repaint and repossess every small horror of our lives. And perhaps it's the heart's doing. After all, it was my heart, as much as my hand, that led to their deaths. It happened quickly, hitting the newsstands like whiplash, the fateful downfall of the Bordeaux family and their empire. None of the tabloids ever managed to come close to the truth. Even if they tried, and some did try, they never stood a chance. Yet as I sit here now, almost a decade since I first came into their lives, there is not an ounce of marrow remaining in white bones absent of the details. While an indulgent game transpired between private rooms in Boston and the now cobwebbed walls of Arrow's Edge, a series of poisons took their toll, and of the hands that crafted them, one is the very same that attempts to write this now. I guess some might call this a confession. There was nothing sweet in the air as I stepped off the train and walked down the tree-lined street in Boston's historic neighborhood of back day. Not then anyway, not that day. Autumn was still weeks away, yet the air was crisp and clean, verdant from the grass along the Charles being freshly cut. But if there is to be any starting point for all of this, then it was there. My heels covered in pollen, a gentle breeze in the curls of my hair, and the New England sun beating down on my face in a way that felt familiar and yet oddly foreign. I had recently returned from living with my aunt in Italy, and after 2 long years away had just set my suitcases down in the living room of my childhood home, when my father handed me the one-tab pages of the newspaper. Unemployment checks, he had explained to me over the phone the week before my flight, weren't enough to cover the family anymore. The tired look in his bloodshot eyes the day of my arrival convinced me that he hadn't been exaggerating. Something in him had changed in my absence, and the piles of pain meds and constant phone calls from the debtors told me I had no choice. In my parents' eyes, my vacation was over. Responsibility was calling, and anyone in the family who was old enough to work was expected to do their share. 6 months prior, my father had been cut from the payroll at his job. No notice given, and, to my knowledge, no clue that it was coming either. If there had been, his pride wouldn't have let him say. His pride, as it were, had also prevented him from sending an email to let me know, at least until the meager savings we had as a family ran out. The situation had made him and my mother more sour and resentful of my time abroad in the first place. The fact that made my homecoming less enjoyable by the second, and made me yearn for the chance to return to my aunt's side and back to a semblance of peace. My aunt, Claire Richetti, was well known in the academic world so long as you studied botany or medieval history, which admittedly not many people do. She was the most successful in her field out of any of us, another thing I think my parents resented. My mother especially, considering that Claire was her sister. By the age of 35, Aunt Claire had a fully established research garden outside of a small village near Montefalco in Umbria, specializing in the reconstruction of medieval apothecary blends and once-lost strains of herbs. It was a tremendously useful garden, niche as it was, and as a result of this specialty, she frequently sold remedies to homeopathic companies and pharmacies alongside hosting PhD candidates from illustrious places like Cambridge and Yale. She was always busy, tending to plants and doing interviews for documentaries in front of the lush greenery and fervent hum of bumblebees. She lived there, away from everything in her beige dresses and lab coats, looking part scientist, part witch, and I loved her immensely for it. I also, I think, saw myself in her, and she in me. I was a 22-year-old mess of a med school dropout when she offered me an internship, a girl doing her best to claw herself up from feelings of failure as I arrived on her doorstep, my ego bruised and fingers nervously clutching my suitcase. Saying I was a dropout isn't entirely true, though. I only considered myself one. That's what happens when you elect to defer your second year of med school due to burnout and a declining GPA. When you stare at the quickly accumulating debt and can't convince yourself you'll ever pay it off, so why bother getting more? Europe in those days was far enough away from the disappointment of my life to seem like the best option. It was romantic, pastoral, and still close enough to family to be viable, thanks to Aunt Claire. Italy was a place my heart had always yearned to travel to after teenage years filled with falling asleep to documentaries on the Borgias or dreaming of scenic tours through Tuscany. But finances had never allowed me the chance to visit. Family vacations never happened beyond the continental United States, if beyond the Massachusetts border at all, and so I couldn't say no when she offered. Plus, while it wasn't much, it paid, saving me from suffering in a customer service job while I tried to get my act together. The sunrise every morning was misty and picturesque, filled with a pink and orange glow that I will never forget. At night, the stars were brighter than I had ever seen and more numerous than my years growing up in Boston had ever led me to believe were even possible. It had been a slice of heaven at a time when my passion for medicine had only just begun to grow again. A sapling of a thing, bruised yet lovingly tended to in her care. But family had beckoned me home, so I sat there, jet-lagged, over a dinner of chicken and boxed mashed potatoes as my father explained to me once more the details about the cutbacks at Ellerhart, the culling that followed the company's purchase by some massive conglomerate eager to downsize. That, combined with the back injury from the fall he had neglected to mention to me before, made it difficult for him to find employment, and a series of medical bills without insurance to cover them meant that there was only one choice. I had to get a job as soon as possible, in the worst economy in decades. And so it came to be that not a month later I found myself hovering on the door of an ornate brownstone in Back Bay. My coffee had been chugged, and I had paced the street for a good 10 minutes while popping gumstick after gumstick into my mouth in hopes of not smelling like cookie dough or coconut or whatever obnoxiously sweet syrup I had chosen to load it up with in a fit of nerves the hour prior. My nerves were not any better. Caffeine had a poor track record with that. I stood there, surrounded by brick and greenery and glistening sports cars, with 3 minutes until my first official interview after weeks of applications. Then I took a breath, spit my gum into the bushes, and knocked. 10 seconds passed, maybe 20, before the door opened with a slow and dramatic creak. Yes, the voice asked. The disdain was unimaginably thick. My back straightened as I tried to hand over my resume. I have an appointment. Helena, I corrected. Garrity, it's for 2:30. The old man looked at the paper for a second and then sighed. Mr. Verdot is not well. All appointments have been canceled for the day. My outstretched hand dipped a little in disappointment. I'm not feeling well. What's wrong? Again, I received a look of annoyance. I'm not at liberty to discuss. Well, where's his position? tending to him. "Look, Miss Garrity," I said, like clarity. "Miss Garrity, I'm sure you came a long way." His sagging face tilted down as he peered at my outfit, as if somehow a man in his 6th or 7th decade could detect my zip code from the thread count of my shirt. "Perhaps we should reschedule." The butler's eyes looked away from the transit card sticking out of my pocket and back to the freshly printed resume in my hand. "If your phone number is on that, then I can have Mr. Verdot call you for rescheduling when his health has improved." No. It was the only thought running through my head at the time. Rent was due in a week and a half. It was this or nothing. But why? If he's ill and his physician is there, wouldn't that make for an ideal interview? Are you implying that the suffering of my employer is a prime time for him to make a business decision? What? No, because if so, then perhaps I should hand this back to you. No, but if there was any time for the physician to need assistance, now would be it, wouldn't it? To test my skill? He raised a gray eyebrow. "Could you ask him?" I insisted. "Please." The door creaked again as the man glanced behind him into the vast interior of the home. "Perhaps." "I'll wait. I'm happy to wait." At last he nodded and motioned with a finger for me to stay put. I ignored how it was the same motion I used on our old dog and instead bade him a quick thank you before he shut the door and shuffled off into the unknown, leaving me to wait outside. I stared down at my feet and how the ragged soles of my mother-borrowed heels appeared in sharp contrast to their surroundings. Never before in my life had I stood on a porch like that. A classic brick so polished and clean it was hard to imagine that a weed could even consider sprouting up. 2 streets over were brownstones whose small yards were filled with weeds, but not this one. It was as if the decay of history had never touched it. The brick sat in charming little patterns, a far cry from the peeling grayish paint and wood rot back home. My feet tapped in anxious habit as I tried to go over anything that could be said to still give me a chance at the job. It had been 2 years since I'd officially done anything in the medical field, but on paper my job at Aunt Claire's counted. I even had a few instances of informally administering a shot of antivenom during the summer, which was exciting, especially since I wasn't entirely sure if it was legal. I glanced around the well-trimmed shrubbery and tried to imagine the likelihood of a surprise snakebite. It seemed low. After another moment, the door opened and the butler motioned with a perfectly bent arm and straight fingers past the marbled entryway and toward what looked like a living room. It was then I realized that despite the building looking like a standard set of 3 or 4 townhouses on the outside, it was in fact one. Just one. And it was immense. "Can I get you anything? Water, perhaps?" he asked. "Sure, water would be great, thank you." The little clicks of my shoes echoed in the chamber-like space until my feet came upon a pale oriental rug. The room was larger than the entire first floor of my parents' apartment, the walls of warm cream illuminated by the lingering summertime sun as it filtered in beyond the ornate glass windows. It wasn't clear to me whether the forbidding feeling of the furniture was a genuine one or simply a mistaken impression from my never having been in such a grand space in all my life. The small couch with its carved wooden frame and tapestry cushions probably cost more than a month's rent. The rug I didn't even want to know. I glanced back for the stern figure who was apparently the Verdot butler, only to find him pacing across the entry with a tray nearly balanced on his palm. He set it down on a golden coffee table and began to pour a glass of water from a pitcher. Little lemon slices caught my eye as they danced just atop the ice. "If you need anything else, my name is George. Please, have a seat. It will be a moment before Mr. Verdot is available." I reached forward to take the glass and did as asked. Moments passed in absolute silence, other than the occasional car driving past and the muffled sound of a conversation from somewhere within the house. After some time and enough fidgeting, I picked up my resume from where George had placed it on the table and began reading over my qualifications. Some fabricated and some truthful, but exaggerated. Just when I began to silently pray that I was not in deeply over my head, the sharp scent of licorice filled the air. I turned to George just in time to see a flash of something pop into his mouth, and a familiar Amarelli candy tin slipped into his breast pocket. From the back of the home, the door opened, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps going closer. "George, there you are. said a man who was short in stature and balding, with a booming voice. He stopped and looked to me. Who's this? Before he could answer, I stood and extended my hand. Helena Garrity, I'm here for the physician's assistant physician. We had an appointment. He looked at my hand and into George before finally giving it a shake. His palm slipped in sweat as he held on to me, as if he were trying to crush my bones underneath as he squeezed. Martin Bordeaux, he said, letting go. Thank you for coming by. As I'm sure George here has told you, we are all a bit under the weather today. I'm going to need you to reschedule. I looked at this man, eager to see what the problem was, but merely found him slightly pallid and avoidant of the light streaming in from the windows, an annoyed squint to his eyes. A hangover, I realized. He was going to send me away because of a hangover.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah. I think at this point we're going to take some audience questions. Is that the case? Awesome. So I will be just popping my eyes around. So if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand and we will deliver them to Kit.
Yeah, I was wondering, given the importance of place and atmosphere sort of in the Gothic genre, and especially because in the beginning of the introduction we talked about the difference between like memory and imagination and reality. So how did you balance sort of lost in the real and lost in the imaginary of both like Lena's story and also like as the author writing this?
Yeah. I think when writing this, I think there's two worlds present in Tripping Arcadia. There's Lena's life and her friends, and then there's the world of Bordeaux. And there's, whenever the two meet, it's not a happy story, but the I view them as kind of the two truths that exist, especially like within Boston. And so throughout the story, you see Lena's perception of that dreamlike space of the wealthy that the Bordeaux live in, and kind of being enamored by it, intimidated, terrified of it, but ultimately viewing it as this dreamlike space. And then as that becomes more of her reality, the horrors of that become more and more grounded in the same way that the horrors of her actual life are present. And I think as the story develops, we see Lena fighting with romanticizing various aspects of both worlds. And as she kind of goes from one into the other, what she views as romanticized and dreamlike and what she views as horrifying or just the daily life kind of shifts throughout the book. So it's definitely something that I enjoyed playing with, but I do think there's a certain degree of truth to both worlds that are present in the book, as well as a certain degree of lies and kind of fantasy with both.
Anybody else? And yeah, let's. You're both wearing a black shirt.
How do you maintain your sanity during the book?
The anger.
The anger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Righteous indignation.
Yeah, I mean, I think anger will get you through a lot. No, I mean, I think a lot of the book deals with that anger and that frustration, and that's really like the anchor within the book is that frustration that Lena feels. And so it was a book that I wrote in a lot of pieces, so I think it was also a story where whenever I felt that anger or was feeling especially frustrated, I could turn to that draft and kind of channel that. But
Well, I can say congratulations.
thank you very much.
On the aisle?
Sure. So kind of talking about how you wrote it and the process specifically, did you find yourself working off an outline more specifically, or did you kind of just completely pants it?
This is one of my favorite kind of questions because I have a very strange writing process, which is when I came up with Tripping Arcadia, and this is true for most of whenever I write, basically, but especially like the day I came up with Tripping Arcadia, I was literally lying there recovering from an illness, like on bed rest on a friend's couch, like on leave from my grad program, and like just depressed doing nothing, and I had nothing better to do than just like tell myself this story that was like just self-indulgent, I guess. And so literally for like 8 hours, once I got this idea for this horrible party scene, and I just sat there on this couch, like just telling myself a story from beginning to end. And when I kind of woke up from that, wrote everything that I could down into like this very messy one page that I then ended up writing like a 20-page, you can kind of call it an outline of the story. It's just, again, me telling myself the story from beginning to end. And over the course of that extensive, messy outline, just building a novel around that. So yes, there's an outline. I have to always have some kind of outline, but it comes from like telling myself the entire thing first. Yeah.
So you call this modern gothic, and it's also a queer novel.
Yes.
When it comes to that kind of genre, there's always a lot of criticism about queer representation and the aspect of like burying your gaze and going through and like why are all the stories pretty? What do you think the gothic genre can offer to queer, like I guess the idea of like, you know, just queer writing?
Yeah. I think for myself as a queer individual, I've always felt like the gothic genre has been a home for queer romances, and in a way where like the original literature isn't technically queer, but there were always these kind of unorthodox romance stories, or the relationships and tensions present within gothic literature always felt a little bit not straight in some way, and I think that was one of the appeals, like for me growing up reading a lot of gothic literature. I saw myself in a lot of gothic characters, but again, we didn't really have that representation of actual queer romances or queer people on the page. If we did, it was kind of like a between the lines thing, or you really would rather
monsters.
Or monsters, yeah. So, and that's a whole other discussion about why, you know, again, I can only speak for myself, but like myself as a queer person, always identified with the more monstrous romances, right? Because that's what was present, but that's also what felt like something to connect to, at least when you're young and figuring things out. And so, I think we're entering into a very wonderful time where the writers who, similar to me, you know, love the gothic genre and identified with aspects of those romances, are able to take the subtext that resonated with them and bring it out and actually make it proudly queer, and write themselves into the stories that they'd always seen themselves in the shadows of. So I think that's something that's been really exciting about a lot of the things going on. I think of like, is it Yellow Jessamine?
Yeah, Yellow Jessamine by Caitlin Starling. It's
Yeah.
phenomenal.
It's a sapphic poison gothic.
Yes,
as well.
Sapphic Poison Gothic. It's a novella through Neon Hemlock. I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
Did I blurb it? I did blurb it.
You blurred
Yes,
it,
I did.
actually, yeah.
Listen,
Um,
2020, I blacked out. It's a lost
The
year.
pandemic's been a time. But yeah, and I think we're seeing more and more of this, and so that's been a really wonderful community to kind of be a part of, is this, you know, seeing queer identified authors being able to write the stories or rewrite the stories that they identified with and finding themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anybody else? Hello.
Hello. So you talked a lot about the decay of wealth and like degeneration and anger and like wanting to take away millionaires' money. So do you think it sounds anti-capitalist to me?
Yeah.
Do
I think I didn't write the book to have any sort of political agenda. I think what I was mainly trying to capture was just the lived experience of myself and my friends and the people of my generation. And there's just a lot of anger in that, and certainly that anger can be politicized. It's not a book that is kind to wealth in any way. But I think there is still that temptation that's found within the book that Nina struggles with. And I can't say that there's necessarily like a political argument being made in the book, but it's not kind to capitalism, but it's I can probably just leave it at that. It's not kind to capitalism, but it's not that's not, I think, the cornerstone of the book.
Anybody else? We have time for a couple more. Hi.
So I think you kind of briefly touched on this and when we were talking about Mexican Gothic and paintings and stuff like that, but I'm really curious, can be books or otherwise, but were there any specific influences that kind of led you to Tripping Arcadia?
Yeah. So I mentioned Brideshead Revisited, which is not a Gothic, but it's one of my favorite stories. And there's this kind of category of literature where you get a kind of like an innocent or a narrator who enters into this world of a messed up wealthy family. Or this is kind of what The Great Gatsby is, this is what Brideshead Revisited is, this is what Jane Eyre,
There's Jane Eyre, there's Rebecca.
So this
A lot of dark academia.
a lot of
as
dark,
well.
yeah, I mean, secret history kind of getting swept up into, though they're not like wealthy, it's something, but like, and so, this is one of my favorite, I don't know if it's not really a genre, but it's a category of book that I've always enjoyed reading, and, I just wanted to write something that felt like those books, but that was angry and with poison. Like, I always wondered why Nick was not angry when he attended a Gatsby party, because I would be. Like, there's the fun aspect of it, and you're just kind of like, but what is actually going on here, And, so we think about these books, and there's certainly a lot of inspiration that was taken from them, but I wanted to rewrite these sort of classic stories, but with that modern lens and that modern frustration that tends to be absent in them. So I would say books like Brideshead, Gatsby, Secret History, all of those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more. Yeah, one more? Awesome. Anybody else? Last question of the night. All right, take it away.
So are there any characters, winner or otherwise, that you found you put more of yourself into than others? And if it wasn't Nina, which character was it?
Yeah. She's laughing because she knows.
I know the answer.
She knows the answer. So Jonathan, who's the brother in Tripping Arcadia, is. So I come from like the Tumblr Dark Academia days back a decade ago, and
The old days
yeah.
when old magic was written. Yes. Oh yes.
I was there. Forgot where. So Jonathan, yeah. So my heart's always been like, I mean, I collect like old editions of Keats and A.E. Housman and these older stories. And Jonathan is a sad poetic party boy who is also like obsessed with the death present in all of these romantic heroes. And to wrap it around to how we opened this, Jonathan is the sad boy crying in the greenhouse.
Yes, he is.
So there's my bias right there. But yeah, a lot of myself went, not myself as a person, but a lot of my passions and my interests, I think, went into creating everything that Jonathan is. And certainly I had the most fun writing any scene with Jonathan.
Thank you so much for your wonderful questions, guys. This is very thoughtful.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, a little round of applause for Kit. Let's make it happen.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you both so much, and thank you to our audience for some really excellent questions. I have to say, there have been many an author event where we get some flop questions, so thank you for like really raising the bar. Before we all sort of scatter about and get books, I just want to cover some logistics, and also plug these beautiful prints and pins. For those of you who don't know, we had a pre-order campaign for Tripping Arcadia that included this beautiful print. I'm sorry it's a little small, but hopefully you can check it out up close when you come by a book. So Marlo Loon is
Marlo
the
Loon
artist?
is the
Yes,
artist.
so you can find Instagram, there's like their art.
Yep. They're on Instagram and Twitter.
And Twitter.
Yeah, Instagram
Yeah.
and Twitter.
Social media, the modern age. So check out Marlo Loon on Twitter. Come check out these beautiful prints and pins. We do have some extras, so if you buy a copy of the book tonight, not only can you get it signed by Kit himself, but you can also get a print and a beautiful pin. And if you want to look at the pin up close when you get your book signed, Kit is actually wearing one. They're really beautiful. They're like this like sort of close up of like a hand holding, what kind of, is that a martini glass?
It's a coupe glass.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
It's the kind of champagne glass they use to make champagne towers, which feature heavily.
There you go. And it's garnished with like a beautiful
Saint
sort of, the attention to detail is astonishing.
I designed it.
Oh, that explains it. I didn't know that. They're beautiful. Yeah, so go ahead to the back. I'll be back there to ring folks out for their books. If you already paid for one online, you can come to me. I'll check your name off the list, get you your book, and then you can file on up here and Kit will sign it for you. So again, thank you, Kit. Thank you, Saint. Thank you to our wonderful audience. This has been so delightful. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for your great questions, especially. It was great.
Now for your mics.
She'll not turn it off.
Your reading was lovely, your questions were amazing. We did, you, not, it was lovely.